What can I say, Matt? This fight is great. We have Thug Nasty coming out with camo shorts this week. Bryce Mitchell, and he's taking on Andre Touchy Fili. Such a weird nickname, such a deceiving fighter. I mean, Andre Fili so far in his young, and it's not even a young UFC career. The guy's been around for the longest time, but he is young. He's only 30 years old, and he's taking on some of the best names in the sport. And we'll get into that section in a minute. For Bryce Mitchell, you look at the blemish on his record. You can't see it up on the screen, but he did lose to Brad Katona, who's no longer in the UFC, on The Ultimate Fighter. But since then, again, Bryce Mitchell just continues to win. Beat Tyler Diamond, beat Bobby Moffett, beat Matt Sales by Twister, beat Charles Rosa
by almost Twister.
Matt, in that fight, I've never seen somebody grapple their way to such scorecards. There were two 30-25s and there was a 30-24. That's absolutely insane. And for Bryce Mitchell, he's such a squirrely fighter. It's not because he's from Arkansas. It's not the way he talks. It's not the fact that he eats and hunts for squirrels. Most of that's normal. It's not the fact that he wants to wear camo shorts so bad, and we'll get the opportunity this week. It's the way that he fights. And you're going to see it up on screen. Maybe the UFC has him listed as a southpaw. Maybe other websites have him listed as orthodox. I put him as switch because you watch his fights, and he'll start one round in the southpaw stance. He'll work out of it. He'll switch to orthodox and vice versa. He's not the best striker, but it works. It's functional. It's wonky. He can throw a little bit of power, but it's all to set up the takedown and the grappling. And once he's got the fight to the mat, this guy is a wizard. And you look at what he did against Charles Rosa. And I remember the comments before in the video. They said, oh, you guys are wrong. Charles Rosa is a black belt, goes to ATT. He's got some of the best training partners in the world. You weren't wrong for saying that. But Bryce Mitchell was just on that other level, especially that night. So coming into this fight, the guy's got a head of steam. He's got a lovely little YouTube channel too. Maybe check that one out if you're not watching Fight Night Picks. And his opposite, Andre Fili, this is where it gets a little weird. So for Andre Fili, he's trained a Team Alpha Male for a very long time against some of the best wrestlers in the lower weight classes. Uriah Faber, heading the team. Chad Mendes, Darren Elkins. The list goes on and on and on. Josh Emmett's another one. We can continue for the rest of the day. TJ Dillashaw used to be there. So he's really trained with the highest level of training partner. The success has been mixed. But again, he's taken on some of the best names in this division. Matt, let it be known. I mean, who's Andre Fili fought so far in the UFC?
Yair Rodriguez, Max Holloway, Sadiq Youssef, Dennis Bermudez. Like, Andre Fili doesn't have easy fights. He's always been a guy who they match up really hard. Because you look at some guys in the UFC, and we talk about this a lot, where you look, they might have 6 fights and they've won 3 and lost 3, but the 3 guys they've lost to are now in the top 15, and the 3 people they beat are now no longer in the UFC. Andre Fili, unfortunately for him, I guess, only fights killers. And he is kind of in that gatekeeper position. I know a lot of fighters hate the term, but I don't really even mean it in a disrespectful way, because Andre Fili just gives everyone a hard fight. It doesn't matter who you are. Max Holloway, he was doing really well in that fight up until he got guillotined at the end. It's going to happen. Max Holloway, arguably one of the best pound-for-pound fighters really ever. The Yair Rodriguez loss is pretty bad because that was, okay, Andre Fili, he's at peak prospect watch. He's at the Eric Silva heights of his hype. And Yair Rodriguez went out there and jump switch kicked him in the head and knocked him out really bad. But again, we're talking about Yair Rodriguez, a guy who I think is ranked in, if not the top 5, top 7 right now. And Max Holloway, one of the better fighters of all time. So Andre Fili's losses have come from the elite of the elite. His wins are weird because they always say Andre Fili's such a good striker, such a good, guy from range. He has really good offensive wrestling. He is known to mix it up really well. I don't like him off his back very much. We talk about this all the time, the Louis Smolka effect, where he doesn't work to get up from his back. He is kind of comfortable just laying on his back, where if Bryce Mitchell is able to get the takedown, if he's able to get on top, Andre Fili, not just Andre Fili, anyone's in a lot of danger, but just the way that Fili does grapple, there's not a lot of urgency for him to always get back up to his feet, and he is able to get held down. Sadiq Youssef was a guy who was able to do that, and yes, Youssef's style is the polar opposite of Mitchell, where Sadiq Youssef he could knock out a horse, really, if he caught it clean, but he's got crazy good, he's got good wrestling, but his ground and pound from top position, it's just so heavy, and he has such a presence to him that it was really able to pin Andre Fili, whereas Bryce Mitchell, a very different style of grappling where it's more finesse-oriented. He's not just kind of a bruiser once it gets on the ground. Such a contrast in styles. The Andre Fili who fought Artem Lobov, shout out to Artem Lobov, and I do think that fight is important because you look at Artem Lobov...
Connor! Shh! You can't. Connor,
I don't think he's watching this, but Bryce Mitchell, his striking, it's not the best part of his game, I would say. Artem Lobov is probably a better striker than Bryce Mitchell, but they do kind of have that same awkwardness to them, and neither guy has the longest of arms, so I do think Andre Fili, from range, he has a really good front kick. He's got a really nice stabbing jab, too, something he doesn't really get the credit that he deserves, because if he is able to stay at range, really work his jab and his front kicks, we saw it against Yusuf, and Sadiq Yusuf, I do think, is one of the better prospects in all of MMA, not just in the featherweight division. I thought Andre Fili did exceptionally well against him at range in the striking. I thought the body kicks were good. I thought the leg kicks were good. And I thought he did really good work against Yusuf. So if he can do that against Sadiq Yusuf on the feet, I am curious to see the level of success he'll have against Bryce Mitchell.
And I mean, you look at Andre Fili in his last fight, it was kind of the same idea. He was fighting Charles Jourdain at a Quebec, Canada, at a Beloy, Quebec, Canada. And it was one of those fights. It was close. It was a split decision. I ultimately thought that Fili did win the fight. But it was one of those fights where you have an up-and-coming guy in Charles Jourdain. He had that win over Doo Ho Choi on his record already, so people are excited about him. Can you beat Andre Fili? Now, Andre Fili put on a classic veteran performance and really beat Charles Jourdain in a lot of the aspects of his game. I mean, what's Jourdain good at? Well, that kick. You have to watch out for his whipping kick. It's his big move, and his hands are great, too. Bryce Mitchell, totally different animal. So for Andre Fili, he's training day in and day out with some of the best wrestlers in the world. So can he keep this fight standing? Because I'd say without a shout of a doubt, Andre Fili wins this fight 10 times out of 10 if it's on the feet. Bryce Mitchell has really wonky striking. I said it from the start. He'll switch between orthodox and southpaw. He's decent from both sides. But he doesn't strike like Damian Maia. He doesn't strike like some of those higher level, like a Rodolfo Vieira. Some of those really high level jiu-jitsu practitioners have like sneaky, deceptive striking. Bryce Mitchell, it's like seeing a night train. Well, you know what's coming. You can hear it coming. You can see the lights. You can hear the dings. It's on its way. I think Andre Fili can withstand some of that anyway.
I do too, and I do think the longer this fight stays in the feet, the more uncomfortable Bryce Mitchell is going to be, and that's really going to force out a lot of panic takedowns from him. Fili's best game plan, I would assume, force Bryce Mitchell and force him to shoot takedowns on you. It's kind of like what McGregor was trying to do against Khabib, where if you really pressure a wrestler, you force the takedowns from them, and then you make them do it. It's not just them kind of free-flowing, not to sound like Robin Black, but they're not in their kind of element at that point where you're forcing the pressure, you're making them make bad shots. And if Fili is able to kind of... I used this example before we started filming, but Chase Hooper, when he fought Alex Caceres, you had a guy who... Is he a gatekeeper? I'd say Caceres is a little bit less than, but he's a guy who has good striking on the feet. He is quite dynamic in his striking, but on the floor, he's not great. Andre Fili, he has good takedown defense. He has a lot of the same skills and positives that Caceres has, but he does have the wrestling defense. And what Caceres was able to do against Hooper was keep him on the feet, really expose the weakness in his game, which is the striking. I don't know if Andre Fili is going to do the same thing, but it is something that I'm starting to get a little concerned with because Bryce Mitchell, I do think this is one of those fights, and it's a classic example of it's going to be really one-sided. I just don't know who it's going to be one-sided for. It's either Andre Fili completely lights up Bryce Mitchell on the outside, throws those body kicks, hurts him with them, hurts him with the leg kicks, takes away a lot of the explosiveness of Bryce Mitchell and his takedowns. He's just able to rack up points that way, maybe get a finish later on. Or Bryce Mitchell is able to get the takedown quite easily. He's able to really implement some different submission sequences. And even if he doesn't get the submission, if in round one Bryce Mitchell gets on top and starts beating the brakes of Andre Fili, if he's able to get the takedown easily, I think that's really the story of the fight. If he can get the takedown, he's going to be able to win.
Same thing as the fight against Charles Rossi. Never have I seen a scorecard. 30-25, 30-25, 30-24 for a guy that didn't earn a submission, didn't really have to chuck hands, and kept such a good black belt down on the ground. You know how good Charles Rose is. If you want to disagree with me, well, then that's fine. But in this fight, again, it's so tough because it's such a clash of styles with a young up-and-comer that so far in the UFC's run shop through all the fighters he's faced. I mean, you look at Bryce Mitchell's fight against Matt Sales. How often do you see a twister? Not very often. Korean Zombie did it. Who else has done it? That's it, those two. So in this fight, it is so interesting for that fact. Now, we look at the odds, Matt. Bryce Mitchell is the favorite as it stands. Open to -110. He's now at a -157. For Andre Fili, open a -110 at Pick'em. Now at a +130. If you go over to Tapology, 821 total votes, 78% going with Mitchell, 54% of those voters saying that he's going to win by submission. So the money's on Bryce Mitchell. The fan vote is on Bryce Mitchell. Again, we haven't seen this guy face much adversity so far in the UFC. I would expect that Andre Fili is really that benchmark test of, okay, Bryce Mitchell beats Andre Fili. this guy is going to have a lot of success against that top 10. And at 145 pounds, we're talking about a division that's really picked up some names. I mean, we're really starting to gain at 45. Bryce Mitchell gets a big statement win here in a co-main event with the camo shorts on. Holy smokes, the world is yours, as Nas said. So what do you think about this one?
Okay, I think Andre Fili is a really smart underdog bet. I will say that. I think him at plus money, it's a good idea. I do think the striking of him is so much better than Bryce Mitchell's. He has a path to victory. I think Bryce Mitchell only needs the one takedown. I really do. For as good as Andre Fili's ground game is, and I do think he has an underrated ground game, I think what Bryce Mitchell did to Charles Rosa was like Damian Maia, Gunnar Nelson-esque, where it's, okay, we have one good grappler, but this is the difference between a good grappler and a great grappler. That's really what Bryce Mitchell was able to show off in that fight. I think the striking of Andre Fili is good, but again, it's not like he has this crazy amount of pop on his shots where he only needs to land that one big one on Bryce Mitchell. I think he does need an accumulation, and that means that he is going to need Bryce Mitchell to be standing stationary in front of him. Bryce Mitchell always going to be doing something, whether it is the striking, whether it is the wrestling. He has a little bit of that Clay Guida in him where he's just doing something. And I do really like that out of an MMA fighter, because you know that if the fight does go to the cards, as long as they're doing things and not getting hit a lot, there's always a good chance for them to at least pick up a decision. I don't agree with the fact that beating Andre Fili means that you can get into that top 10. Josh Emmett,
15.
Even then, like, featherweight is just murderer's row. Bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, welterweight. And it used to really only be everyone talked about lightweight, but I really do think those four divisions are as good as any division has ever been in MMA. That's just how deep they are. But I'm going to say Bryce Mitchell gets it done. I think he'll be able to get the submission win. I do think there's going to be a lot more hype behind Bryce Mitchell after this weekend, but that's the one thing I'm worried about. After you beat Andre Fili, there's no more easy fights. And not that any of the guys we fought before were easy to say, but after you beat Andre Fili, then you do have to fight the Sadiq Yusufs. You do have to fight those up-and-coming guys who are kind of in the same category as yourself. You're no longer going to be fighting the gatekeepers or maybe the older guys who have had a few losses. You're going to be fighting the guys who, they're also on the rise, and they're also hungry like you are, and they do have specialties. So Bryce Mitchell, I'm going to say wins this fight, but I do think the matchmaking is going to be getting a lot harder for him moving forward after this one.
And I mean, next, think about it. You got Mirsad Bektik. You've got tough fighters like Andre Fili's teammate, Darren Elkins. You got Dan Ige. You've got Ricardo Lamas that had a big win over Bill Algeo, and he retired. So there's still names out there at 45, and apparently some of them are retired. So I'll just keep bringing up old, long, bygone 45ers. In this fight, though, you have to worry about it for Andre Fili. He did get submitted by such a name as Godofredo Pepe. You know, Godofredo Pepe.
He's a wizard on the ground.
He is a wizard on the ground. And so is Bryce Mitchell. So it is a difficult one. I like the takedown defense of Andre Fili. I like it if he's striking on the feet. I like his length. He uses it half decently well. That's a terrible thing to say about a guy near the end of a video. He uses it half decently well. But I do like all those things for Andre Fili. And I think if he can push a bit of a pace as the fight goes on, it's going to go more towards Andre Fili in those respects. I'm going to go with the underdog in Andre Fili. Now, for full transparency, in our co-main event last weekend, it was a nail-biter. Matt went with Whitaker. I went with Cannonier. I wanted to change my pick in the 11th hour. I stuck it out.
Pretty one-sided fight.
And I got wrong. Yeah, I got it wrong. But still, I'm really looking forward to this fight. It should be a really good one, Matt. You're going with Bryce Mitchell. I'm going to side with Touchy Fili, creepy nickname. You're going to want to keep it locked in for our main event preview. We have Uriah Hall taking on Anderson Silva. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.